Cash was suffering from multiple skull fractures and bleeding on the brain, which meant that he would never see, he would never hear, he would never understand anything, he would never walk. Essentially, his life was dramatically changed permanently forever, and that's when they had to go through that excruciating decision-making process to remove him from life support.
Cash Christopher Bell was born in October 2012. He was the son of Ashley Bell. Cash had no medical issues. Now in January 2013, the Bell family hired Sarah Cullen. She would work with them temporarily as a nanny for baby Cash in their home. This was pending the opening of a daycare in June 2013. Sarah's first day alone with Cash was on January the 7th, when Ashley returned to work following maternity leave. Cash at the time was 3 months old. Now on the morning of February the 28th, 2013, Chris, who was the father of Cash, he woke up at 6 a.m. He went to change Cash's diaper. He fed him a bottle and then brought him downstairs to Ashley. Ashley put Cash in a bassinet while she finished getting ready for work. The Bells testified that it was a typical morning and that Cash was active and making eye contact. Chris then left for work at 7 a.m. Sarah, the babysitter, arrived at 7:15 and then Ashley left for work at 7:40. So at this moment, Sarah and Cash are the only ones home. But then around 9:20, Chris came home because he needed to get his checkbook. But as Chris entered the house, he yelled to Sarah that he had forgotten his checkbook. He then heard Cash breathing. He turned around and found Cash lying face down in the pack and play. Chris rolled him over. Cash did not open his eyes and he took a little breath. Cash's blanket was around his face and his chest area, and Chris moved it down to his waist. Of course thinking, well, he can breathe. Because at this moment, Chris thought, well, he's sleeping. Chris then heard Sarah in the nearby bedroom. After he rolled Cash over, he grabbed his checkbook. As he was leaving, he heard Sarah ask him if he woke Cash up. Chris estimated that he was in the house not more than a minute. As Chris was getting into his car, Sarah came to the door with Cash in her arms and asked Chris what he said when he first walked in the house. Chris at the time could only see the back of Cash's head. Now at approximately 10:15, Sarah called her boyfriend, Andrew, and told him that Cash was not breathing and that his feet were blue. Andrew immediately proceeded to the residence to take Cash and Sarah to a hospital. When Andrew arrived at the residence, Cash was not responsive, but he was breathing. Sarah told Andrew nothing about the events of that morning on the way to the hospital. Now, when they arrived at the hospital's emergency room, Sarah stated that she found Cash sleeping on his belly and he doesn't normally sleep like that. Previously, Ashley, the mother, requested that Sarah log Cash's diaper changes, feedings, naps, and anything else of note, and the last entry in the log was at 8 a.m. Now at 10:20 a.m., Sarah called Ashley and frantically told her that she was taking Cash to the hospital because Cash had just woken up from a nap and he was not breathing properly. Ashley and Chris later arrived at the emergency room where they waited with Sarah and Andrew. Ashley testified that she questioned Sarah during that time about what happened. Ashley testified that she did question Sarah at the hospital during that time when she left for work if anything that happened, and Sarah maintained that Cash woke up from his nap in that condition where he's not breathing properly. A nurse eventually summoned Ashley and Chris to be with Cash until he was transported to a pediatric hospital due to the extent of his injuries. And how many times have all of you heard before the suspect say, I don't know, they woke up in that position? Now, Deputy Brenda Wheeler and Sergeant John Pankanin of the Douglas County Sheriff's Department interviewed Sarah on February the 28th and March the 1st in 2013. During her interview, Sarah told primarily 4 different versions of what occurred to Cash that morning. Initially, she stated that Cash started the day acting normally, but that when he woke up from his nap, his breathing was not normal. Sarah denied to Wheeler that Cash had an accident or fell that morning. Wheeler then informed Sarah that Cash's skull was fractured and that his head had to have made impact with something, or something made impact with the head. Sarah eventually told Wheeler that when she was walking out of the back door with Cash, she may have accidentally touched his head somewhere on the door. And when she came back in, Cash was not breathing right. After consulting Dr. Suzanne Haney, a pediatrician, outside of Sarah's presence, Wheeler informed Sarah that Cash's injuries could not have been caused by a little tap on the door. Sarah continued to deny that anything else happened that morning, but then she told Wheeler that Cash had fallen out of his swing at about 8:15. Now, I'm a parent myself. I have 2 children. If a child of mine falls out of his little swing, right, I forgot what they call, but the image is on the screen, they're not going to crack their skull because of it. You see, according to Sarah, Cash whimpered but then fell asleep at 8:45 a.m. While Wheeler was again absent consulting Haney, Andrew and Sarah started to text each other. Andrew told her via text that they said Cash is going to be okay. But this is what Sarah responded with. She said, "I know, but it's still my fault. I didn't buckle him in the swing. He flopped out of it. I don't know." Andrew responded, "Oh really? What did they all say then?" Sarah wrote, "I don't know. That's the very only thing that happened out of the ordinary, but he didn't even cry, so I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't think to take him to the doctor." After talking to Haney, Wheeler informed Sarah that Cash's injuries could not have been caused by a short fall from the swing. And this is quite the conundrum, right? Even for me, because I know falling from a small swing, like, in your living room or whatever, is not going to cause a fracture. And if it is, it's not going to kill the child, right? But in her text message, I don't think she's smart enough to think, you know what? Let me fake this accident so maybe I can get away with it. Maybe she was being honest, so who knows? Wheeler and Pankinen, the police officers, informed Sarah that Cash's injuries were consistent with shaking and that he was set down or thrown down hard. Sarah then began to cry and admitted that she lied. Oh, the old waterworks, eh? She stated that Cash had fallen out of the swing the day before. And according to Sarah, at about 8:15 a.m., she had slipped on the stairs while carrying Cash and had fallen onto the tile floor below without hitting any of the steps. Sarah stated that Cash landing on his back and his hands clenched, but he didn't cry. She put a bag of frozen vegetables on the back of his neck and then put him in his pack and play after he fell asleep on her chest. And according to Sarah, she called Andrew instead of an ambulance because Cash wasn't that bad right away and because it wasn't her fault. She denied shaking him. She wrote a statement about Cash's falling down the stairs and generally maintained this version of events during her interview. Haney herself is a child abuse pediatrician who specializes in the diagnosis and care of suspected abused and neglected children. She consulted on Cash's case, and when she examined Cash, she noticed that he was not acting well. He was irritable and not focusing his eyes, and he had an obnoxious shrill kind of a scream. At that time, Cash was breathing on his own. You see, he had injuries that concerned Haney on a 4-month-old, including a bruise on the left side of his forehead. There were also 2 tiny circular abrasions under his chin, and a bruise on his tongue. Now, Officer Wheeler confronted Sarah during the March 1st interview about these abrasions under the chin. Sarah told Wheeler that she first saw them on February the 25th, and that Ashley told her the abrasions occurred over the weekend when Ashley put Cash's bib on him, and the abrasions match the metal clasps on the inside collar of the onesie that Cash wore. But between March the 1st and March the 5th, Cash's neurological condition rapidly deteriorated, as evidenced by his lack of responsiveness and an onset of frequent seizures that could be controlled only through his high doses of medication. And then doctors determined that Cash would not have any significant neurologic recovery. Ashley testified that Cash's doctors gave them the long-term prognosis that Cash would never be able to see, he wouldn't be able to hear, he wouldn't be able to walk, or be without feeding tube and a ventilator, and that he would likely never understand his parents. Wow, that's so sad. So, based on this information, the Bell family decided to take Cash off life support on March the 5th, and on that day, he died. That is so sad. Now, several medical experts testified about the extent of Cash's injuries and their possible causes. The evidence demonstrated that Cash sustained a large hematoma on the right back of his head, a smaller bruise on the back of his head, a skull fracture on the back of his head, a second skull fracture on the right side of his head that extended to the base of his skull, subdural and subarachnoid hemorrhages in and around all surfaces of the brain, actual injury to his brain, including torn blood vessels and lung filaments, as well as bruising on both sides, and multiple retinal hemorrhages that extended to the back of his eyes. Doctors testified that Cash sustained a global or diffuse brain injury, meaning that it affected his entire brain. In fact, 90% of his brain was permanently damaged and abnormal due to a lack of oxygen. The medical experts agreed that Cash's injuries were consistent with non-accidental trauma, as in he was abused on purpose, as in caused by shaking or impacts to the head, or both. There was testimony comparing the significant force involved in Cash's injuries to 1 to 2-story fall, or a high-speed motor vehicle accident, and a television falling on a child's head and crushing it. Wow. There was testimony that separation between the two skull fractures indicated that they were caused by two separate forces. While none of the experts could pinpoint an exact date and time of injury, they estimated that Cash's brain and eye injuries occurred within 0 to 2 days of February the 28th, and that his skull fractures occurred within 2 weeks of that date. Though in light of Cash's brain injury, it was highly unlikely that the fractures occurred 2 weeks before February the 28th. And based on the history given by the Bells, Sarah's statements, and the medical evidence, 2 medical experts said that Cash's brain injury occurred sometime after Ashley left for work on February the 28th. They testified that children with Cash's type of brain injury are immediately unwell and do not respond appropriately, and that symptoms would manifest fairly quickly and may be intermittent but would be noticeable and cause concern. In fact, several medical experts testified that Sarah's version of events could not have accounted for all of Cash's injuries. Eventually, Sarah was sentenced to 70 years in prison. When I was reading this story, I can't get that out of my mind. He could no longer walk, talk, hear, or even recognize his parents. Imagine being a parent in that situation. Cut off the life support machine of your new baby. Wow. Comment, tell me what you think.